A Nazi officer adopted a Jewish baby, and the Gestapo never learned the truth. True story intro. Berlin, April 15th, 1943, 11:47. PMCS Hauptsturmführer Klaus Weber watched his wife Hannah sleep in a hospital room, a newborn baby resting in her arms. The child was exactly 3 hours old. Light blonde hair, eyes not yet set in color, delicate features that seemed destined to become the Aryan ideal the Reich celebrated so obsessively. Weber felt paternal pride mixed with ideological satisfaction. This was his son, his genetic contribution to the future of the superior race. The first of 7 children he planned to have, according to the Lebensborn directives, the SS selective breeding program. What Klaus Weber didn't know, what Hannah Weber had concealed with absolute perfection for 9 months, was that the baby in her arms was not German. He was Jewish, completely, undeniably Jewish under the very Nuremberg racial laws Weber had sworn to defend. The biological mother had died 3 hours earlier in a different ward of the same hospital, after giving birth in secret with the help of a resistance nurse. The baby had been moved quietly from room to room while Weber waited outside, convinced he was witnessing the birth of his own Aryan child. For the next 12 years, that Jewish boy would grow up in the heart of an SS officer's family. He would attend elite Nazi schools. He would be photographed for Reich propaganda. Would learn to give the Hitler salute before he could read. He would become the perfect example of Aryan youth. And the Gestapo, with all its paranoia, its obsessive record-keeping, its genealogical tests tracing ancestry back 5 generations, never suspected a thing. This is the story of how a German woman married to a Nazi carried out the most impossible deception of World War II. How a Jewish baby survived by being raised by the very enemy exterminating his people. How a mother's love proved stronger than the entire machinery of industrialized genocide. And how, in the end, the truth surfaced in the most devastating way imaginable. Do you think you could keep a secret like that for 12 years? Could you raise a child knowing that one mistake, one wrong word, would mean instant death for both of you? Tell me in the comments, because this story will make you question the limits of human courage. Part 1. The World Before the Lie. Hannah Kirschner was born on August 3, 1912, in Munich, into an upper-middle-class family that embodied everything German culture prized: education, discipline, national pride. Her father was a railway engineer, her mother a piano teacher. The Kirschner home was orderly, prosperous, conservative in ways that seem quaint today, but back then, defined respectable bourgeois life. Hannah was the eldest of 3 sisters, raised with clear expectations: academic excellence followed by an appropriate marriage. She studied literature at the University of Munich from 1930 to 1934. Turbulent years when National Socialism was transforming every corner of German society. This is where things become more complicated, because Hannah Weber lived in constant contradiction. Officially, she joined the League of German Girls in 1933, the Nazi Girls' Youth Organization. She attended rallies, sang nationalist songs, and appeared to embrace the ideology of the rising Reich. But privately, according to documents discovered decades later in her personal diaries, Hannah fundamentally questioned what she was seeing. An entry from December 1933 reads, "People in uniforms shout slogans about purity, but their eyes are filled with ordinary cruelty. I wonder if I was born in the wrong moment of history." It was heresy she never spoke aloud. In 1936, Hannah met Klaus Weber at a performance at the Munich National Theater. Klaus was a lieutenant then, rising quickly through the SS. Tall, blonde, educated, from a Prussian military family, he embodied the masculine ideal Nazi propaganda glorified. He was also genuinely intelligent. He spoke 4 languages and had studied philosophy before a sense of duty carried him into the military. Their courtship was formal, proper, supervised by both families. They married on June 14, 1937, in a ceremony that included both Christian rites and Nazi symbols, the strange fusion that defined that era. Hitler himself sent a congratulatory telegram, an honor Klaus treasured. The first years of marriage followed the expected script. Klaus was transferred to Berlin in 1938 and promoted to Hauptsturmführer, captain. He worked in SS administration, processing paperwork, handling logistics. He wasn't a field combatant, but a military bureaucrat, which meant Hannah saw the inner workings of the regime more closely than many officers' wives ever did. And what she saw disturbed her deeply. Klaus brought work home, discussed cases, complained about bureaucratic incompetence. Gradually, Hannah realized that the cases he processed involved Jewish deportations, property seizures, and the arrest of dissidents. Her husband wasn't personally killing anyone, but he was enabling the machinery that did. Hannah faced the moral dilemma millions of Germans faced. Was she complicit by association? Could she love a man who served a system she increasingly saw as monstrous? In 1939, the situation sharpened. Klaus was temporarily assigned to Poland after the invasion, helping establish the Warsaw Ghetto. He returned 6 months later changed, thinner, with a look Hannah recognized as trauma hidden beneath bravado. One night, after too much schnapps, Klaus spoke with unusual honesty. "Hannah, the things I've seen, what our government is doing, it's not what they told us. It isn't relocation, it isn't protection, it's something much worse." Hannah pressed him. "What do you mean?" Klaus shut down instantly, SS training overpowering the alcohol. "Forget what I said. It's not a wife's business. It's duty. It's necessary for the Reich." But Hannah had seen the horror in his eyes, and she understood that necessary was how men rationalized the irrational. By 1940, the Weber marriage existed inside a carefully maintained performance. Klaus performed the role of loyal SS officer. Hannah performed the role of model Nazi wife. Both knew they were acting, but neither acknowledged the other's act. The pressure to have children intensified constantly. The Nazi regime was obsessed with demographics and treated Aryan women as carriers of the blood of the future. Hannah faced constant questioning from other officers' wives, from doctors, from her own family. Why hadn't she gotten pregnant after 3 years of marriage? The medical truth was that Hannah had severe endometriosis, a condition that made conception extremely difficult. But admitting infertility in the Third Reich was admitting racial failure. So Hannah pretended they were trying, that it was only a matter of time, while privately consulting specialists who offered little hope. By 1942, Klaus suggested adoption through Lebensborn, the SS system that provided racially valuable babies to Aryan families. These infants came from various sources: illegitimate children of SS officers, children from occupied countries deemed sufficiently Aryan, babies of German single mothers. Hannah refused with vague excuses. The truth was she couldn't bear the idea of raising a stolen child, because she increasingly understood that Lebensborn was exactly that: institutionalized theft disguised as eugenics. The war went on. Klaus was transferred from city to city, always in administrative roles. Hannah followed him, maintaining small apartments in Berlin, Munich, briefly Prague. They lived well compared to ordinary civilians, extra rations, guaranteed housing, a steady salary. But Hannah felt increasingly trapped in a life she considered morally unbearable. In January 1943, something changed, fundamentally. Hannah met Sarah Rosenbaum. Part 2. The meeting that changed everything. Sarah Rosenbaum was 26 in January 1943, 3 years younger than Hannah. A Jewish woman from Munich, the daughter of a doctor and a music teacher. She came from an educated family, much like Hannah's. In another universe, they might have been childhood friends. But this was 1943 in Nazi Germany, and Sarah had spent the last 3 years in hiding. Her family had fled to France in 1938, but Sarah secretly returned to Germany in 1940 using forged papers, trying to rescue her elderly grandmother. By the time she arrived, her grandmother had died. Sarah became trapped, unable to return to France, her documents eventually compromised, forced into an underground life in Berlin. She lived under a false identity provided by a small German resistance network. She called herself Greta Müller and worked cleaning the homes of Nazi officers, an irony she never missed. The Nazis preferred German, domestic workers, and Sarah's forged papers identified her as an Aryan woman from Hamburg whose family had died in Allied bombings. Hannah met Sarah when the resistance network placed her as the domestic worker for the Weber apartment in January 1943. Klaus was often away for work. Hannah was alone most of the time. Hiring household help was normal for officers' wives. The first weeks were strictly professional. Sarah arrived at 8 a.m., cleaned, cooked, and left at 4 p.m. They spoke minimally, Sarah keeping her head down, Hannah maintaining the proper distance between employer and servant. But something began to shift by late January. Hannah noticed small things. Sarah read in her free moments, always serious books, philosophy, literature. Once, Hannah found her reading Kant in Old German, a level of understanding that suggested a real education. Ordinary household servants didn't read Kant. Sarah made small mistakes that hinted at a different origin. She pronounced certain words with an accent Hannah recognized as Bavarian, but slightly off. She avoided conversations about family with an intensity that felt deliberate. Hannah began to suspect, but suspect what exactly, she still didn't know. The revelation came on February 8, 1943. Klaus had brought home documents he needed to review over the weekend. Confidential files he left in his study. Hannah, curious about the work her husband refused to discuss, read them when he stepped out. They were deportation lists for transports to Auschwitz, names, ages, former addresses, identification numbers, thousands of names in meticulously organized columns. Hannah felt physically sick. She vomited in the bathroom. She cried silently so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Sarah found her on the bathroom floor, pale, trembling. "Mrs. Weber?" Sarah asked, genuinely alarmed. Hannah looked at her, and in that moment of total vulnerability, without filters, without performance, she whispered, "How can God allow this? How can I be married to a man who processes these lists?" Sarah froze. It was the kind of dangerous question an SS officer's wife was never supposed to ask. "I don't understand, Mrs. Weber," Sarah answered carefully. "I saw the lists," Hannah said. "The transports, the numbers. They're people, families, children. And my husband processes the paperwork like their inventory." Sarah made a split-second decision that would change both their lives. She knelt beside Hannah, looked her directly in the eyes, and whispered, My real name isn't Greta Miller. It's Sarah Rosenbaum. I'm Jewish. I'm on those lists. Hannah should have screamed. She should have called the Gestapo. She should have had Sarah arrested immediately. Harboring a Jew knowingly was a capital crime. Instead, Hannah began to sob even harder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." Sarah took Hannah's hands. "You can't apologize for the whole country. But you can help me. Will you help me?" Hannah nodded without thinking through the consequences. In that moment, she only knew she had to do something, anything, to resist the killing machine she was tied to through marriage. "What do you need?" Hannah asked. "I need to hide," Sarah said. "My papers are compromised. The network thinks the Gestapo is close. I need to disappear completely for a while, maybe months." "You can stay here," Hannah said impulsively. "Here," Sarah repeated, stunned. "In the home of an SS officer." "It's the last place they'd look," Hannah said. It was insane logic that, in the inverted world of the Third Reich, made perfect sense. Sarah moved that night into the servants' room of the Weber apartment, a tiny space designed for live-in domestic workers. Officially, Sarah was a live-in maid. In reality, she was a Jewish refugee hidden in the very center of a residential complex for SS officers. The audacity of the arrangement was staggering. Klaus approved of having a live-in maid. It meant the apartment was better maintained. Other SS officers lived in the same building, saw Sarah regularly in stairwells and corridors, and never suspected anything. Over the following weeks, Hannah and Sarah formed a deep friendship built on shared secrets. They talked for hours whenever Klaus was away. Sarah described her life before the war, her family, her dreams, her losses. Hannah shared her doubts, guilt, and growing disillusionment with the regime. They were two women trapped on opposite sides of genocide, finding a shared humanity in an impossible space. In March 1943, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Part 3. The Secret Pregnancy. The baby's father was Daniel Kaufman, a member of the resistance network who had helped Sarah in 1942. Daniel had been arrested by the Gestapo in December 1942 and executed in January 1943. Weeks before Sarah learned she was pregnant, Sarah told Hannah with utter desperation. "This is a death sentence," she whispered. "A pregnant Jewish woman in Berlin. I can't hide this for long. I can't give birth in a hospital. I can't register the baby. I can't." Hannah cut her off. "You will give birth. The baby will live. We will find a way." But finding a way required planning that defied logic. Sarah was 8 weeks pregnant in March 1943. That meant an approximate due date in October. 8 months to create a plan that would allow a Jewish woman to give birth in Nazi Germany without being discovered. Hannah began to search for options. A home birth? Impossible. Sarah would scream, the neighbors would hear. A resistance clinic? They existed, but they were dangerous and often infiltrated. Forged medical documents? Too complicated, and Sarah would eventually need real medical care. The solution came in the strangest way. Hannah decided she would fake her own pregnancy. The idea was insane in its audacity. Hannah would pretend to be pregnant at the same time as Sarah. She would use prosthetic bellies to simulate the growing pregnancy. In October, when Sarah gave birth, Hannah would claim the baby as her own. Sarah would disappear, supposedly returning to her family in Hamburg. The baby would be registered as the child of Klaus and Hannah Weber, officially Aryan on paper. Sarah initially rejected the plan. "You're out of your mind. Klaus is an SS officer. There are medical records, required exams. documentation. You can't just fake a pregnancy for 9 months. I can, Hannah insisted. Klaus is away for work all the time. He's so busy he barely pays attention to my health. Doctors are bureaucrats. They verify forms. If I have the right forms, filled out correctly, no one questions it. And when the baby is born, Sarah pressed, then what? Klaus will expect an Aryan child. My son will be Jewish by every Nazi definition. What if he does genealogical tests? What if he suspects something? Babies look like babies, Hannah argued. Unless they have extremely distinctive features, they're basically indistinguishable at birth. Your child won't have a Star of David on his forehead. Sarah was silent for a long time. Then, why would you do this? Risk your life, your marriage, everything for my child. We hadn't even spoken before January. Hannah chose her words carefully. I've spent 5 years married to a man serving a regime that will exterminate your people. I can't stop the trains to Auschwitz. I can't save thousands. But I can save one. I can save your son. And maybe, just maybe, that will redeem a small part of the complicity of my silence. Sarah cried. Hannah cried. And the impossible plan was set in motion. Hannah announced her pregnancy to Klaus in April 1943, after a medical appointment where she had finally conceived. Klaus was ecstatic. His wife would finally fulfill her racial duty. He sent telegrams to family, friends, and SS superiors. Hannah Weber was pregnant, due in early October. The performance became serious. Hannah wore looser dresses. She added padding beneath her clothes to simulate a growing belly. She faked morning sickness, cravings, mood swings. She became an expert at the theater of pregnancy. The medical records required even more creativity. Hannah needed doctor's certificates, pregnancy confirmation, blood tests, ultrasounds. She secured all of it through the resistance network she had been connected to through Sarah. It turned out there were German doctors in the resistance. Not many, but enough. Dr. Friedrich Hartmann was one of them. A gynecologist at Berlin's Charité Hospital. He had been forging medical documents for hidden Jews since 1941. Hartmann created a full medical history for Hannah's fake pregnancy. Properly dated appointments, progress notes, lab results consistent with a normal pregnancy. Official paperwork, correct stamps, everything perfectly forged. Klaus never questioned any of it. Why would he? His wife was pregnant, the documents confirmed it. His world finally made sense again, according to Nazi ideology. Meanwhile, Sarah endured a real pregnancy in silence. Confined to the Weber apartment, leaving only when absolutely necessary. Wearing clothes that hid her growing belly. Real morning sickness Hannah only pretended. Real kicks she felt alone in her small room while Hannah discussed fake kicks with Klaus at dinner. The situation was psychologically brutal for both women. Hannah lived with constant terror of being discovered. Sarah lived knowing her son would be raised by a Nazi officer, would call another woman mother, would never know his real identity. In August 1943, 3 months before the due date, Sarah suffered complications. Bleeding that suggested placental problems. She needed real medical care. Hannah contacted Dr. Hartmann. He came to the Weber apartment disguised as a technician inspecting radiators. He examined Sarah in her room while Klaus was at work. The placenta is positioned incorrectly, Hartmann diagnosed. Partial placenta previa. Not immediately fatal, but delivery will be complicated. She will need to give birth in a hospital with surgeons available in case of hemorrhage. Hannah felt the plan collapsing. A hospital? Impossible. Sarah can't go to a hospital. She doesn't have legitimate medical documents. They'll discover her. then both mother and baby will likely die in childbirth. Hartman said bluntly. Placenta previa can cause catastrophic bleeding. Without immediate surgical intervention, bleeding out is almost certain. The plan required a massive revision. Hannah couldn't simply fake a home birth and claim Sarah's baby. Sarah needed a hospital delivery, which meant Hannah would also have to deliver in a hospital at the same time. Hartman developed a new plan even more audacious. Both women would give birth at Charité Hospital on the same night in different wards. Sarah under a false identity as a regular patient, Hannah as an SS officer's wife. Hartman would coordinate so the babies would be mixed up. Sarah's baby handed to Hannah, while Hannah's child vanished into hospital bureaucracy. It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure, but it was the only plan they had. Part 4. The night of the birth, April 15th, 1943, 8 p.m. Sarah went into labor 6 weeks early. Stress, conditions, compromised health, everything contributed to a premature birth. Hannah panicked. The plan required that she also go into labor at the same time. But faking convincing labor demanded acting beyond anything she'd done before. She called Dr. Hartman. Sarah is in labor. It's happening fast. What do I do? Come to the hospital, Hartman said. Now, bring Sarah through the service entrance. I'll bring you through the main entrance. Klaus must believe you went into labor, naturally. Hannah called Klaus at his office. The baby is coming, she said in a strained voice that needed no acting because her terror was completely real. I need to go to the hospital now. Klaus was home within 15 minutes. He found Hannah bent over, clutching her belly, panting, the most important performance of her life. He rushed her to Charité Hospital. While Klaus parked, Hannah sent a coded message to a resistance contact waiting outside. She's inside. Move now. Sarah was brought in simultaneously through the service entrance by 2 resistance members dressed as orderlies. Her belly in obvious labor, her face pale with pain. Dr. Hartman had prepared meticulously. Room 7 for Hannah, room 23 for Sarah. Different floors, different nurses, different teams. Hartman overseeing both deliveries, moving between rooms with an authority no one questioned. Klaus waited outside room 7, as nervous as any first-time father. He smoked cigarette after cigarette, pacing back and forth, completely unaware that 2 floors above him, a Jewish woman was giving birth to the boy he believed was his son. Sarah's delivery became complicated, exactly as Hartman had predicted. Placenta previa caused severe bleeding. Hartman had to perform an emergency C-section to save both Sarah and the baby. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah gave birth to a boy, 2.8 kilograms, healthy despite the prematurity, crying loudly. In room 7, Hannah continued her performance. Pushing that led nowhere. Calculated screams so Klaus could hear outside. A full labor that wasn't happening. At midnight, Dr. Hartman came down to room 7 with Sarah's baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. He entered the room where Hannah lay in bed, sweating convincingly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Weber," he announced loudly so the nurses could hear. "A healthy boy, perfect delivery." He placed the baby in Hannah's arms. She looked down at Sarah's son, wrapped in blue, eyes still closed, completely, unaware of the impossible miracle that had kept him alive. Hartman allowed Klaus to enter. Klaus looked at his son with absolute pride. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Perfect. A true Aryan." The irony was so brutal, Hannah almost laughed hysterically. This baby Klaus celebrated as a perfect Aryan was Jewish by every definition of the racial laws Klaus helped enforce. While Klaus held the baby, Hartmann discreetly went up 2 floors to see Sarah. He found her pale from blood loss, alone, except for a resistance nurse, crying silently. "Your son is alive," Hartmann whispered. "Healthy. Hannah has him. He's safe." "Can I see him?" Sarah begged. "Just once. I just want to see his face." "Impossible," Hartmann said gently. "It's too dangerous. Klaus Weber is in the hospital right now. If he sees 2 babies born the same night..." "I know," Sarah said. "I know. Just tell Hannah. Tell her to love him. Tell her his real mother loved him, enough to let him go." Hartmann delivered the message. Hannah wept while holding the baby, and Klaus misread the tears as maternal joy. Sarah was discharged 2 days later under her false identity and disappeared back into the resistance network. She never saw her son again. Hannah and Klaus brought the baby home as their own. They named him Thomas Weber. The birth documents, fully forged by Hartmann, registered him as the biological child of Klaus and Hannah Weber, born April 15, 1943, Aryan by complete lineage. The greatest lie of the Third Reich had begun. Part 5. Raising the Enemy. The first months with Thomas were the most terrifying of Hannah's life. Every visit from relatives, every encounter with other SS officers, every medical checkup was a potential catastrophe. Klaus was euphoric about his son. He sent photographs to his family, showed Thomas off at social gatherings, spoke endlessly about raising the perfect Aryan. Hannah smiled, played the proud mother, while inside, the terror never eased. Thomas was a baby like any other. He cried, ate, slept, grew. But Hannah saw Sarah in every feature. The eyes, which eventually turned a deep brown like Sarah. The shape of the nose, the curve of the ears. Every detail reminded her this child was Jewish, being raised by Nazis. The most immediate danger came from the genealogical checks the SS routinely carried out. The Lebensborn program required proof of racial purity across 5 generations. Klaus, as an SS officer, would eventually need to provide complete genealogical documentation for Thomas. Dr. Hartmann had anticipated this. He had created not just a forged birth certificate, but a complete forged family tree tracing Thomas's fictional ancestors back 5 generations. Every name was taken from the records of real people who had died without close family, making verification difficult. The documents were masterpieces, indistinguishable from legitimate records. When Thomas was 6 months old, the SS conducted a routine inspection of Klaus's family documentation. 2 officers came to the apartment and examined every paper. Hannah watched in concealed terror as they reviewed Thomas's birth certificate, his forged genealogy, his medical history. "Everything is in order," one officer announced after 2 hours. "The child is racially pure as far as we can determine. Congratulations, Hauptsturmführer Weber. You are raising a future soldier of the Reich." Klaus couldn't have been prouder. Hannah couldn't have been more afraid. As Thomas grew, his personality emerged in ways that unsettled Hannah. He was extraordinarily bright, quick to learn, constantly asking questions. By 2, he spoke in full sentences. By 3, he read basic words. By 4, he showed an early interest in music and mathematics. Klaus credited it to superior genetics. "It's my blood," he would say proudly. "Weber intelligence. It comes from my family line." Hannah knew it came from Sarah, whose family valued education, culture, intellectual achievement. Thomas was brilliant because his real mother was brilliant. But Hannah could never say it. The war continued. By 1944, Germany was clearly losing, though propaganda denied the reality. Allied bombings destroyed cities. The Eastern Front collapsed. But the Holocaust accelerated as if the Nazis knew time was running out and wanted to complete the genocide before the end. Klaus continued processing deportation papers, now with increasing urgency. He came home exhausted, drank more, slept less. Occasionally, in moments of alcohol and darkness, he admitted doubts. "Sometimes I wonder," he said one night in January 1945, "if history will judge us kindly, if what we've done, if the orders we followed." "What are you saying, Klaus?" Hannah asked carefully. "Nothing," he said, shutting down. "Just fatigue. Ignore me." But Hannah could see her husband beginning to confront the reality of his actions. Too late, too little, but confronting it nonetheless. In March 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Klaus was evacuated west with his unit. Hannah and Thomas were supposed to follow by train, but the rail system was collapsing. They were trapped in Berlin as the city fell. The last days of the Third Reich in Berlin were apocalyptic. Constant bombing, Soviet artillery booming closer and closer, buildings on fire, civilians fleeing or hiding in cellars. The entire social order disintegrated. Hannah hid with Thomas in the basement of their apartment building while the Battle of Berlin raged above. Thomas, now 2 years old, didn't understand why they couldn't go outside, why his father wasn't there, why the adults around him kept crying. On May 2nd, 1945, Berlin surrendered to the Soviets. Red Army troops entered the city. What followed were days of absolute chaos, looting, violence, revenge against anyone associated with the Nazi regime. Hannah faced a new danger. As the wife of an SS officer, she and Thomas could be arrested, deported, executed. The Soviets didn't distinguish between active Nazis and Nazi families. Hannah destroyed every document linking her to Klaus. She burned photographs of him in SS uniform, his letters, anything that showed his affiliation. She kept only papers identifying herself and Thomas as ordinary German civilians. Thomas's birth certificate, with its forged genealogy, survived. It was now a document that could protect rather than endanger, because it identified Thomas as a civilian with no ties to the regime. Klaus Weber never returned from the Western evacuation. Hannah later learned he had been captured by American forces in Bavaria, held briefly as a prisoner of war, then released in 1946 with the status of Mitläufer, a follower, the category for lesser Nazis considered not criminal enough for prosecution. Klaus tried to contact Hannah by letter in 1946. She never replied. She had decided Thomas would not grow up knowing his supposed father had been an SS officer. She severed every tie. To the Soviets, and later the authorities of East Germany, Hannah was a war widow whose husband had died in the final evacuation. No one questioned the story. There were millions of widows like her. Part 6. Raising a child inside a secret post-war life in East Berlin was survival of a different kind. No longer the terror of the Gestapo discovering Thomas, but the new terror that post-war deprivation would kill what the SS hadn't. Hannah took whatever work she could find. She cleaned buildings, worked in kitchens, sold possessions to buy food. Thomas, now 3, endured a childhood marked by constant hunger, cold, uncertainty. But there was also a kind of liberation. For the first time, Hannah could raise Thomas without the constant performance of Nazism. No more Hitler salutes, no more songs about racial purity, no more propaganda photographs. Still, the secret remained. Thomas could not know he was Jewish. Post-war Germany was still anti-Semitic in many ways, especially in the East under Soviet occupation. The Soviets officially suppressed anti-Semitism, but privately, many Germans kept their prejudice. More importantly, Hannah had decided Thomas would not learn the truth until he was old enough to bear it. How do you tell a small child his real mother gave him away at birth, that he was raised by Nazis, that his entire identity is a lie? It was a burden no child should carry. Hannah found small ways to honor Sarah's heritage without revealing anything. She taught Thomas to value education, culture, compassion. She read him books that emphasized justice over power. She taught him that strength comes from kindness, not domination. Thomas grew into a sensitive, intelligent, curious boy. He asked endless questions about the world, about justice, about why the war had happened. Hannah answered honestly about the horrors of Nazism, without revealing his adoptive father had been part of that system. In 1950, when Thomas was 7, he asked about his biological father for the first time. "Where is my dad?" he asked. "Other kids have dads. Why don't I?" Hannah had rehearsed this answer for years. "Your father died in the war. He was a good man who fought for what he believed was right. He would have loved you very much." It wasn't entirely a lie. Daniel Kaufman, Thomas's real biological father, had died fighting the Nazis. Klaus Weber, the unknown adoptive father, had survived, but was dead to them. "Was he a hero?" Thomas asked. "Yes," Hannah said, thinking of Daniel. "He was a hero." Thomas accepted it with the solemnity of a 7-year-old. He didn't ask again for years. Meanwhile, Hannah occasionally received news of Sarah through post-war networks. Sarah had survived the war by hiding in different places across Germany. After the war, she emigrated to Palestine. Later Israel, when it was established in 1948, she rebuilt her life, there, eventually marrying and having 2 more children. Sarah wrote letters to Hannah through intermediaries, never directly. The letters always asked the same thing. Is he well? Is he happy? Can I see him? Hannah always answered, he's well, he's happy, but you can't see him. Not yet. Someday, maybe, but not now. It was a cruelty almost impossible to describe. Sarah had given up her son to save him. Now that they had both survived, they still couldn't reunite because the truth would shatter everything they had built. In 1953, when Thomas was 10, Hannah faced a new crisis. By Jewish tradition, Thomas should have had a bar mitzvah, but he didn't know he was Jewish. The irony was crushing. Sarah, living in Israel, was likely thinking of her son reaching religious age. Thomas, living in East Berlin, had no idea he was Jewish. Hannah decided she couldn't deny Thomas his heritage entirely. Without telling him directly, she began teaching him about Judaism as part of general education. "The Jewish people suffered terribly during the war," she explained. "Millions were murdered in concentration camps. It's important to understand this history, to honor their memory." Thomas listened with intense seriousness. "Why did the Nazis hate the Jews?" "Because of fear," Hannah said. "Because of ignorance. Because of the kind of evil that grows when people decide others aren't fully human." "That's horrible," Thomas said with a child's conviction. "If I had been there, I would have helped the Jews. I would have fought the Nazis." Hannah felt tears rise. "I know, sweetheart. I know." She couldn't tell him he was Jewish, that his very existence was a form of resistance against everything the Nazis had tried to accomplish. Part 7. Adolescence and Questions. By the mid-1950s, East Germany was firmly established under communist rule. The German Democratic Republic suppressed open discussion of the Holocaust in favor of a narrative that emphasized communist resistance against fascism. Thomas, now a teenager, grew up in that environment. He attended schools that taught communism had defeated fascism, that the Soviets had liberated Europe, that the working class had been the true victim of Nazism. There was truth in those narratives, but also enormous omissions. The Holocaust, specifically against Jews, was minimized. Soviet anti-Semitism was ignored. History's complexity was reduced to propaganda. Thomas, intelligent and restless, noticed the gaps. At 15, in 1958, he began asking uncomfortable questions. "Why don't we talk more about what happened to the Jews?" he asked in class one day. His teacher, a loyal communist, replied, "The Jews suffered like all groups under fascism. But we must focus on organized resistance by the working class, not the victimhood of particular groups." Thomas wasn't satisfied. He began reading on his own, finding censored books, smuggled Western articles, survivor testimonies. He developed an obsession with understanding the Holocaust specifically. Hannah watched with complicated emotion. She was proud Thomas sought truth. She was terrified his search would eventually lead him to questions about his own identity. In 1960, when Thomas was 17, he confronted Hannah directly. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." Hannah felt the old terror return. "What is it?" "Who was my father, really? I don't mean his name or what he did. I mean, who was he? Why do you never talk about him? Why don't we have photographs?" Hannah had rehearsed answers for 17 years. "Your father died in the war. He was part of the resistance against the Nazis. That's all you need to know." "That's not enough?" Thomas pressed. "I've been investigating, looking for records. I can't find any Klaus Weber who died in the war with my birth date. I can't find any record of your marriage. It's like my whole history before 1945 is blank." Hannah felt the walls closing in. Records were destroyed in the war. Millions of documents were lost in bombings. "Too convenient," Thomas said. "Mom, what are you hiding?" This was the moment Hannah had feared for 17 years. But Thomas was still young, still vulnerable, still not ready for the full truth. "Your father was a good man," Hannah said finally. "He died fighting evil. That's all that matters. The rest is too painful for me to talk about. Please respect that." Thomas, frustrated but loving his mother, accepted it. But he didn't stop searching. Over the following years, Thomas became increasingly involved with dissident intellectual circles in East Berlin. People who questioned the communist regime, read forbidden Western philosophy, and discussed history honestly. In that circle, he met Rachel Goldstein, a young Jewish woman whose family had survived by hiding in Germany. Rachel's story echoed Thomas's in unsettling ways. Raised by a single mother, father unknown, childhood shaped by wartime secrets, Thomas and Rachel formed a deep friendship that turned into romance. They shared a connection neither fully understood, a sensitivity to injustice, a fixation on the Holocaust, a sense that their identities were somehow incomplete. Hannah watched their relationship with devastating irony. Her Jewish son, ignorant of his own identity, falling in love with a Jewish woman. It felt as if some invisible force were pushing him toward his real heritage. In 1965, Thomas was 22 and planning to marry Rachel. Hannah knew she couldn't allow him to marry without knowing the truth. It would be too great a betrayal. But before she could decide how to reveal the secret, outside events forced her hand. Part 8. The Revelation. In August 1965, Hannah received a letter from Israel. It was from Sarah Rosenbaum, now Sarah Cohen, after marriage. The letter was simple. "Hannah, I am dying. Cancer. The doctors say weeks, maybe months. Before I die, I need to see my son. Just once. Please. I ask for nothing else." only to see him, to know what he became. Please? Hannah wept as she read it. 22 years she had kept this secret. 22 years Sarah had lived without her child. Now, at the end of her life, she asked for one thing: to see him. Hannah knew she had to tell Thomas the truth. She couldn't deny Sarah this, and she couldn't let Thomas marry without knowing who he was. But how do you say it? How do you explain 22 years of lies? How do you admit that his entire identity is constructed? Hannah decided to take Thomas to dinner at a quiet restaurant. It was September 3rd, 1965. Thomas was 22, 3 months before his planned wedding. "Thomas," Hannah began, "I need to tell you something I've kept from you your entire life. It will change everything you think about yourself. But you need to know." Thomas, seeing the seriousness in his mother's face, set down his fork. "What is it?" Hannah took a deep breath. "You are not who you think you are. Your name is not Thomas Weber. Your father was not Klaus Weber. And I am not your mother, at least not biologically." Thomas went completely still. "What are you saying?" "You're Jewish," Hannah said. "Your real mother was Sarah Rosenbaum. She gave birth in April 1943 in Berlin. I pretended to be pregnant at the same time. When you were born, I claimed you as mine. I raised you as the son of an SS officer to save your life." The silence stretched into something endless. "That's impossible," Thomas said at last. I'm registered as Aryan. There are documents, a genealogy. This is all forged," Hannah cut in, "by the resistance, to save you. Your real mother was Jewish and hiding from the Nazis. Your real father was a resistance man executed by the Gestapo. She gave you up to save you, and I claimed you because it was the only way you could survive." Thomas stood so abruptly his chair scraped and toppled. No, this can't be true. You would have told me. For 22 years you would have..." "Told you what?" Hannah shot back. "When? When you were 5, 10, 15? At what age are you ready to hear that your whole life is a lie? That you were raised by the enemies of your own people? That your very existence is a miracle that required betraying every principle the Nazis claimed to stand for?" "Where is she?" Thomas demanded. "My real mother. Is she alive?" "She lives in Israel," Hannah said softly. "But she's dying. Cancer. She wants to see you before she dies. That's why I'm telling you now. I can't deny her that." Thomas walked out of the restaurant without another word. Hannah followed at a distance as he wandered East Berlin for hours. He finally returned to their apartment near midnight. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every detail, from the beginning." Hannah spoke all night about meeting Sarah, the secret pregnancy, the insane plan, the birth, the years of terror, every lie, every near discovery, everything. Thomas listened without interrupting. His face moved through shock, rage, confusion, but also something else. A slow dawning understanding of what his mother, both mothers, had sacrificed to save him. When Hannah finished, morning had come. Thomas finally spoke. "Did you love me?" he asked. "Or did you just keep me alive out of guilt?" "I loved you from the moment I held you," Hannah said. "You are my son in every way that matters except biology. But you have another mother who loved you enough to let you go. And you deserve to know her before it's too late." Thomas nodded slowly. "I want to go to Israel. I want to meet her. But I don't know how to feel. I don't know who I am." "You're Thomas," Hannah said. "You're the bright, kind boy I raised. You're Jewish by birth and German by upbringing. You're both. You're neither. You are whoever you decide to be." Part 9. The final meeting and the legacy. Getting permission to travel from East Germany to Israel in 1965 was almost impossible. The communist regime rarely allowed travel to the West, especially to Israel, with which it had no diplomatic relations. But Thomas had an unexpected advantage. Rachel Goldstein had family in Israel who could provide an official invitation. Thomas applied as the fiancé of a Jewish citizen visiting family. East German bureaucrats, ignorant of the full truth, approved the visa, assuming he was Jewish anyway, by association with Rachel. The irony was perfect. In October 1965, Thomas flew from East Berlin to Tel Aviv via Vienna. It was his first trip outside Germany. Hannah couldn't accompany him. She had no official reason to travel. Sarah Cohen lived in Tel Aviv with her husband and her 2 other children. She was 52, but cancer made her look far older. She weighed barely 45 kilograms, pale skin, eyes still fierce despite the disease. When Thomas knocked, Sarah opened the door. They stared at each other for a long moment. "You're so tall," Sarah finally said in German. "In my dreams, you were always a baby. But you're a man now." "Hello," Thomas replied, not knowing what else to say. How do you greet the mother you never knew? Sarah invited him inside. They spent the next week talking, filling 22 years of silence. Sarah told him about her life before the war, her family, her love for Daniel Kaufman, the agonizing decision to give him up. "Every day for 22 years, Sarah said, I woke up thinking of you. I wondered if you were alive, if you were happy, if you would ever know the truth. It was a pain that never ended. But it was also peace, because I knew you were safer without me than with me." Thomas cried, something he rarely did. "I don't know if I can forgive you for giving me away, or forgive Hannah for lying, or forgive myself for existing." "There's nothing to forgive," Sarah said gently. "You survived. That's the only thing that matters. You survived when 6 million didn't. Your existence is a victory over everything the Nazis tried to achieve." Thomas met his half-siblings, David and Miriam, both younger. They were strangers, yet shared blood. The Cohen family welcomed him without questions, without judgment. The day before Thomas had to return to Germany, Sarah took him to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. They walked slowly through the exhibits, Sarah weak but determined. "I want you to see this," she said in the Hall of Names, where the names of Holocaust victims are recorded. "These are your people. This is your heritage. The Nazis tried to erase us, but you survived. You carry our memory with you." Sarah died 3 weeks after Thomas returned to Germany. According to her husband, her last words were in German, "My baby lived. That is enough." Thomas entered a profound identity crisis. Was he German or Jewish? A victim or the son of a perpetrator? A deceiver or the deceived? Eventually, he decided he was all of those and none. He was Thomas Weber, though that wasn't his real name. He was Jewish, raised by Nazis. He was a Holocaust survivor, though he had never been in a camp. He was a living miracle and a walking lie. He married Rachel in 1966. They had 3 children. He taught them both Jewish heritage and German history, refusing to separate the two. His children grew up knowing the full story, carrying the complexity without shame. Thomas later wrote a memoir titled The Impossible Child, published in 1982. It told his story, the courage of both mothers, the audacity of the deception that saved him. Hannah lived until 1987, dying at 75. Her last words to Thomas were, I regret nothing. I saved you. That's enough. Klaus Weber, the unknown adoptive father, died in Mittendenweist 1979 in Bavaria. He never learned the son he had celebrated was Jewish. He died believing he had raised the perfect Aryan. The story of Thomas Weber, whose real Jewish name, adopted after Sarah's death, was David Kaufman, represents the kind of complexity history prefers to flatten. It wasn't simply a story of heroism or betrayal. It was both. It was everything. Hannah risked everything to save another woman's child. Sarah gave up everything so her child could live. Thomas lived a lie that became a truth deeper than mere facts. In a 1990 interview, already elderly, Thomas reflected, "People ask if I'm angry about the lie, if I feel my true identity was stolen from me. The answer is yes and no. I was robbed of knowing my biological mother. But I was given life when it would have been death. I was lied to, but I was also loved. The truth is more complicated than simple narratives." In 2003, Thomas, now 60, was honored by Yad Vashem, not as a victim, but as a witness. His very existence testified that even in the heart of Nazi darkness, acts of impossible humanity happened. The room where Sarah gave birth at Berlin's Charité Hospital now bears a plaque. Here, in 1943, two mothers worked together to deceive the Reich and save one life. Their courage reminds us that maternal love transcends blood, race, and fear. The lesson of this story isn't simply heroism, it's moral complexity. Hannah was the wife of an SS officer, benefiting from the regime, yet she risked everything to save a Jewish child. Sarah was a Holocaust victim, yet she worked with a German woman to save her son. Thomas was raised by Nazis, yet he was Jewish. No simple category captures the truth. In his final interview before his death in 2015 at 72, Thomas said, "I am a child of the Holocaust in a way few understand. I didn't survive camps. I survived by being invisible in plain sight. My existence was impossible under Nazi law, but I existed. And that impossibility is what makes my life matter. It proves that even perfect totalitarian systems have cracks where humanity can endure." The final legacy is this: a Nazi officer adopted a Jewish baby without knowing it. The Gestapo never learned the truth. The baby grew up, survived, and thrived. And in that impossible survival, it proves that love can defeat even the machinery of industrial genocide. Not because love is stronger than hate, often it isn't, but because love is more persistent, more inventive, more willing to risk everything for one single life, while hate only destroys en masse. Sarah and Hannah, two mothers separated by everything except their love for a child, defeated the Third Reich more completely than many armies, because they saved exactly what the Nazis tried to destroy: one individual Jewish life, unique and priceless. And that life continues through Thomas's children, his grandchildren, his legacy of testimony. The impossible baby grew up to tell the impossible story that reveals an essential truth. Humanity endures even when all logic says it shouldn't. The Nazis never suspected an SS officer was raising a Jewish child as the perfect Aryan. They never discovered it. And in the failure of their obsessively monitored system, we find hope. Even the most totalitarian regimes can be beaten by individual acts of impossible courage. Thomas/David died knowing he was both German and Jewish, both deceived and saved, both lie and truth. And he lived fully inside that paradox, refusing to simplify what history insists on making complicated. His final wish was to be buried in Israel beside Sarah, his biological mother. But he also asked that his heart be cremated and the ashes scattered in Berlin, where Hannah had died. "I belong to both," he wrote, "and I refuse to choose." On his grave, written in Hebrew and German, David Kaufman/Thomas Weber, son of two mothers, survivor of the impossible, testimony that love transcends everything. And maybe that is enough.